one of the great things about real estate is that once again, we have the ability to help other people. And that's why I still love it. That's why I get excited. If it was just about drywall and windows and homes, that doesn't really light me up that much. When it's other people and we can be of service to them and help them out of a problem that they are facing, that to me is where the magic lies. And so one of the strategies where you get to help a lot of people in a lot of ways that most people don't think of it this way, I'm going to reframe it for you, is tax liens and deeds. And a lot of people, when they think of tax liens and deeds, it's like, oh, well, that person lost their home over a very small amount of money. And here I am picking up for pennies on the dollar, and I'm going to make a paycheck. But what about that last person who used to own it? And I'm going to reframe it. After you see this presentation, you're going to view things a lot differently. One, because we don't have to wait till property goes to auction before we can try to get involved. Number two, when it does go to auction, these homes, the county needs that property tax dollar to keep their hospitals open, their police force, their schools. So this stuff would all have to shut down if it weren't for investors like us stepping up to the plate and bailing out these delinquent taxpayers. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Everybody else makes it look so easy. And for me, it's like, that's the toughest part of my job, is figure out how to share screen on Zoom. First of all, I want to clear up what liens and deeds are. It's kind of funny. I actually read, when I was trying to figure this out, I read a lot of different books. I took some courses. The more I delved into it, the more confused I got because there's so much conflicting information. I even read a book that was supposed to be on tax liens and deeds, and it kind of used the terms interchangeably. They're actually two very different things. So I'm going to go and I'm going to explain that to you in a few minutes. I also want to talk about what are the facts, the myths, the misconceptions, because there is so much bad information out there. It's probably, of all the strategies I've ever done, it's probably one of the most misrepresented when people talk about it. And how do I capitalize on these? And how do I get started? So we're going to talk about all that. And then I'm also going to give you some bonus stuff at the end. I'm going to talk about what I call the trifecta of real estate. Now, once again, there's the reason I created this, there's tons of misconceptions out there. I've taken courses where they're missing really vital steps. And if you don't have those steps, that can cost you a lot of money. And I've seen it happen many times at the auctions. I also love this strategy because it's great for people just starting out. You don't need a lot of money. And I wish I knew about this 31 years ago, and it did exist back then, because back then I was buying homes for a lot more in 1989 than I've been able to purchase at this tax deed auction here in the year. I haven't bought any recently. Obviously, a lot of these auctions are shut down, but a lot of my students have picked up homes for a lot less than what I paid back in 1989 for homes. And I wanted a strategy where my clients could recoup their education costs quickly. So I'm just going to give you a little backstory on this. When I was trying to figure out tax liens and deeds, originally I was thinking the stuff that I'm doing in Atlanta right now, the turnkey properties that we sell to investors, I was thinking, let's do it in Texas. We can get homes for really cheap. We can fix them up, and I can put tenants in place, and I can sell these to investors around the planet. And it seemed like a great idea at the time. And then I started going to these auctions, and I realized the auctions are really good if you're looking to get a property here, property there. I think I told you yesterday, we've sold 1,100 homes in Atlanta over the past 10 years. So if you do the math, we sell a home pretty much once every 3 days. And these auctions only take place once a month. If you're really lucky, you'll pick up 2 or 3 properties at an auction. Quite often, you'll get one, or sometimes you go months and you won't get any because the competition is too fierce. And I need a lot more supply than that. In the meantime, I had already done the research and started to build some teams around it, and would have been ready to go if I could have got more supply, and just realized it's not gonna work for the amount of demand that we have on our properties. So I was always getting calls from students and people saying, how do I get my first property? How do I get in the game? I don't have a lot of money. And I started to think, what a great win-win this would be if I taught other people how to do this. And I went and started my thing up in Atlanta. Atlanta, we buy our homes from banks. We buy 30 or 40 at a time. So that's a great win for me. It allows me to get the inventory that I need. And it also gave me this strategy that I had finally figured out and built a team around but I just couldn't get enough inventory for my needs. So I decided to turn this into training and to help other people. And this is, by the way, this is a 4-day course. There is a ton of things that you need to know before you can safely do this. It's a 4-day course. And so I'm going to give you the basics as much as I can today, but obviously I can't give you 4 days in a few hours. So I'm going to do as best I can and answer all your questions. So at least you have this on your radar. Now, like I said, the auctions for the most part are closed right now. My favorite one is in Harris County, which is Houston, Texas. It's been shut down now for pretty close to a year. And there's going to be a lot of backlog. And so I feel like if I did 3 days with you guys over this weekend and didn't at least put this in front of you and let you know what the opportunity looks like, so you have it on your radar, I'd be really not adding as much value as I should, because this has been a very good strategy for people that want to get 1 or 2 properties. Like I said, if you're looking to get 100 properties, you're not going to be able to do that in 1 month, but 1, 2, or 3 here and there, yes, absolutely. So, and also this is a strategy where my students can recoup their education costs very quickly, because if you do one deal, it can be very lucrative. And a lot of my students that you've, like Cal, who you met yesterday, that's how he didn't get his start. Actually, he got a start in Las Vegas with me on a different training at a different type of auction, but he graduated to this and did very well with it. And Mike Fritz has been to this auction with me. And so I've taken a lot of the people that I've put in front of you and then I'm going to put in front of you later today and tomorrow. This is how they got their start, was jumping into this strategy. So I also include one of the things that I love to do for my students, and obviously it's not included with this training because you don't have the full training, but I like to give my students my teams. Whenever they work with me, I like to give them my teams, because if you don't have if this is your favorite strategy and you don't happen to live in Houston, Texas, and you live in Calgary, Canada, or you live in Australia, it would be very time consuming and expensive for you to go participate in this, because these are live auctions. And if you're not there live and in person, you can't participate. It's not online, at least not as of yet. So I actually have teams on the ground that actually go to the auction for my students. They actually bid. They can actually do renovations on properties. If you're looking to flip it, I've got realtors that can help you do that. If you're looking to hold it, I've got property managers that can help you do that. And so that's typically when people work with me, I like to give them other resources besides just the strategy, because I realize that some of the best strategies don't necessarily take place in your own backyard. So as I've mentioned numerous times, the reason I love real estate is that we are problem solvers. And so many people, especially if their home is getting ready to go on the auction block, they're suffering from a lot of bigger problems than just money. When you're having money issues, you tend to be very stressed and depressed. So your health is failing. Quite often there's a lot of marital breakups over money. And so there's a lot of stuff below the surface that we don't even know we're helping people with a lot of times. They're going through a lot of stuff. And so you guys probably, I've mentioned a few times, I used to have a company called Foreclosure Fixers. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more towards the end of this presentation and show you how I combined that with tax liens and deeds back in the day, and how you can absolutely duplicate this and do it yourself too. So, but I just always love to reiterate that every deal you do should be a win-win. If you get greedy, I've seen a lot of people get greedy and they had that home run and then that was kind of the end of their career. This is a very small community, and you want to have a good reputation for helping other people, not finding some little old lady who doesn't know the value of her home, stealing it out from under her and leaving her in a bad spot. That's not why we do this stuff. So as you know, behind every real estate transaction, there's a story. Nobody randomly wakes up in the morning, puts their home on the market just for fun. So this one here says house for sale by owner because my neighbor is a bad word. So sometimes it is because they don't like their neighbors and they want to move. Sometimes this one says husband left us for a 22-year-old. House for sale by scorned, slightly bitter, newly single owner. So sometimes it's marital breakups. Owner ready to croak, must sell. So we see a lot of homes that get become estate sales, for example. There's a lot of different reasons why a home might go for sale. And as problem solvers, when we look at liens and deeds, the underlying problem is that these people can't afford their property taxes. And without these property taxes, the county, as I mentioned earlier, can't keep their schools open, their hospitals, the police going, etc. Now, here's a really interesting thing that I found really bizarre as I was learning this strategy, is that this tax liens and deeds have been around for 200 years. So for as long as they've had property taxes on properties, they've also had a solution for dealing with people not paying their property taxes. And yet, after all these years, there's very few people who know how to do this properly, I found. And so I'm going to teach you what I have learned and what has been my experience and what's worked for me. And by the way, I made myself a guinea pig. I wasn't a floating wolf, I was a floating guinea pig as I learned how to do this. And I invested a lot of money in making mistakes to sort some of this stuff out because I didn't know what was true. But anyway, there's a lot of people that don't even know the difference between a tax lien and a tax deed. So I'm going to clear that up for you right now. A tax lien, you're typically not buying a piece of property. And so I'm going to use Trina as an example just because I happen to see her on my screen right now. She just happens to be in front of me, so she gets picked on, but in a loving sort of way. So imagine Trina got a bill from the county saying, you owe us $1,000 in property taxes. They're due July 1st. And if you don't pay them, you're going to get a 20% penalty. So July 1st comes and goes. Trina doesn't pay her taxes. And now she owes, instead of $1,000, now there's a 20% penalty. So Trina owes $1,200 right now. Unbeknownst to her, the county is now going to look for an investor such as myself. And they're going to say, hey, we've got this tax lien for sale. If somebody's willing to give the $1,000 that Trina owes, we're going to give you the $1,200 once we collect it from her. So I say, that sounds pretty good. 20%, that's a lot better than what I make at the bank. I'll buy that. And so I buy what's called a TLC, or tax lien certificate. So I want you to know the distinction. You're not buying a piece of property at this point. Now, whenever you get these tax lien certificates, there's always a redemption period. And that's kind of the length of time that Trina has to bail out her arrears. And so if it's 2 years, so after the first year, I've got this tax lien certificate, she still hasn't paid. And by the way, I don't have to go chase after Trina. It's a county that does that. They keep sending her notices. In some counties, it's actually against the law for me to contact the owner. So a lot of times the owner has no clue this has even been sold. And it doesn't really affect them in any way other than they have an extension to pay that they normally wouldn't have had, because now the government has that money to pay their police force and the hospitals, et cetera. And so to make a long story short, we get to the end of that redemption period. It's 2 years. Trina still refuses to pay. And I'm now in a position where I can foreclose on her. Now, I don't want you to get overexcited, because maybe 2% of the time does that ever happen. Most people are not going to lose their home over such a small amount of money. And if they do, there's usually a reason behind it. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So, but in theory, I'm in a position now where the county's kind of given up on Trina and they say, no, she's obviously never going to pay. And now I'm in a position where I can hire some lawyers and I can go and foreclose on Trina and now potentially get that home for the the $1,000 that I spent, and now plus some legal fees. So in theory, I don't know if any of you are as old as I am and remember back in the day there were these infomercials saying, I bought this home for $500, and you see this really happy guy who got the home for pennies on the dollar. Well, that does happen once in a while, but it doesn't happen that often. So when you're doing liens, I want you to consider that most of the time you're not going to get a property. You're going to get a return on your investment, and that can range up to 36%, by the way, in theory. We're going to talk about that in a second too. So it's going to be a lot more than what you make at the bank, but 80% of tax liens are under $1,000, which means that even if you're getting 36%, you're going to make $360 on it, and you could buy a whole bunch of them. But the problem is, if it ever gets to the point where you actually have to foreclose and take that property, there's going to be some due diligence, and that due diligence cost can quite often eat up more than what you're going to make on the lien. So if you're prepared to walk away from a lien and not foreclose because you haven't done your due diligence, then it can be semi-lucrative. But I'm going to show you why I greatly prefer tax deeds and why I particularly like doing redeemable deeds, which I'm going to explain in just a little bit here. So I'm not saying tax deeds are bad. I'm just saying that because relatively speaking, you're getting a small amount of money. It's a high percentage return, but a small amount of money. It doesn't really cost, or what you're going to make doesn't really cover your costs if you want to do this really, really well. Now, having said that, I've got a good friend of mine who buys these in bulk from the county. So he's not bidding at the auctions like most people have to do. He is actually buying in bulk, and he buys thousands of them. He's got an office with an in-house legal team. His legal team actually does approach homeowners, and they have a great systems and a great process. And he makes a lot of money doing that. But for investors like you and I that are maybe looking to do this on a small scale, it's for the most part, it can be very lucrative, but I'm going to show you something way better than this. So I'm going to go and move on from tax liens. The good thing about it though is it's very hands off. You're basically buying the certificate. There's not a lot of work you have to do. The county's going to do most of the heavy lifting for you, meaning they're going to keep bugging that. They're going to keep bugging Trina saying, listen, you haven't paid yet. When are you going to pay? Oh, at the end of this year, we're going to add another penalty. When are you going to pay? So it's not you doing that work. So you're just sitting back, you're waiting. And then all of a sudden, if you're lucky, a check shows up in the mailbox one day and your 1,000 just turned into 1,200. But like I said, I've got a better idea for you. As I mentioned earlier, we already talked about this. The homeowner has a redemption period. It does give you the potential occasionally to get a property for pennies on the dollar. And by the way, I'm not saying don't do this, but be careful, because if you don't do the proper due diligence, I'm going to give you an example. Imagine you got a home and Trina decided she's not paying because she found out before her house was built, there was a gas station on there and that land is contaminated. And so yeah, you foreclose on her, you take that property, it now goes into your name. With ownership comes liability. So I want you to write that down. Whenever you have ownership to something, you have liability. So now Trina's, let's say there's a $50,000 cost to get that land back up to code. Well, now she just transferred that to you and you now have this $50,000 liability that you have to deal with. And so sometimes when you get these properties for pennies on the dollar, there's a reason why the people were happy to have you take control of that property and ownership, because it now takes a liability off of their hands. So you have to make sure that what you're getting is a liability or is an asset, not a liability, or that deal of the century may turn into a really big money pit for you. So if you are interested, I'm not, like I said, we only have so much time and I want to delve into the stuff that I like doing and that I recommend. So I'm not going to delve too deep into liens at this point, but you can go to the National Association of Counties, NACO.org, and it's going to tell you, you can do all these different counties kind of list how they deal with their tax liens. Sometimes they're auctioned off. Sometimes they actually have catalogs. You just pick from the catalog. Sometimes you have to compete to get them. And so quite often in places like Florida, for example, they have what's called bidding down the interest rate. So let's say it even started at 36%. Well, there's institutional investors there, meaning banks and hedge funds, and they might bid it down to 2% or 3%, because guess what? They're using our money. If you're banks use our money that we put in on deposit, and they're paying us almost nothing. By the time they give us all our fees, we're actually paying to leave our money in the bank in a lot of cases. And they're going and they're buying things like this. And if they can make 3% or 4% or 2%, they can do all right with that because they have a spread in that. For you and I, we're not even keeping up with inflation because the cost of money is more than that. And so there's just better ways to deal with it. And I'm going to get into that right now. So with tax deeds, usually when you get a tax deed, it's the opposite. You are buying a property. When you go to a tax deed auction, if you're the high bidder, you now get ownership of that home. And once again, you've got to do due diligence on that property, but at least the profit margins, if you do this properly, the profit margins are high enough that the due diligence is a drop in the bucket compared to what you're going to make. And so usually when you go to and I use the word usually, make sure you notice that word. Usually there's no redemption period, meaning you go to the auction, you now own the home, you can flip it, you can live in it, you can rent it, you can do anything you want with that property because you now have full ownership to it. When you're the winning bidder at the tax deed auction, you've got the deed to the property. Right then and there, in theory, it takes a little while to register, get the title back, but in theory, you have full control of that property at that point, and away you go. And hopefully, if you got a nice big spread between what it's worth and what you paid for it, you're in pretty good shape. So if we look at this map, it talks about what states have which, whether they're lien states, deed states, and something called redeemable deed states, which I'm going to talk about. So if you look at these pinkish red ones, those are all your deed states. And those are the ones, like I said, where you're going to get a property. If you look at the green ones are lien states, where you're getting, in most cases, what's called that tax lien certificate. Now, the yellow ones, they're kind of an anomaly, and we're going to talk about those. And those are what are called redeemable deeds. And redeemable deeds are, if liens and deeds could make a baby, it would be a redeemable deed. We're going to talk about that in a lot more detail, because my favorite place to do this, Texas, is a redeemable deed state. And then there's some states like Florida, Ohio, there's a few others, Nevada as well, that have both liens and deeds, depending on which county that you do the strategy in. So it can vary from place to place. By the way, Hawaii is a redeemable deed state. So if you, and I'm not an accountant, once again, but there's some accountants in the room, and they might agree with me that potentially if you were to go to Hawaii to attend a tax deed auction, and you might want to spend a few days on the beach around those same days, you might be able to potentially write off a vacation. But I am not an accountant, so don't believe me. Talk to your accountant or somebody in this room. But anyway, I digress. I'm going to get back to the topic at hand. So tax deeds are for people that want to bake their own cake. They're willing to do a little bit of work. With the tax liens, like I said, there's nothing you really do. You send money, and normally you just wait and then you get money. That's it. With this, it's a little bit more involved. You're going to have to sometimes fix up the property, and it really depends on your strategy. This is just basically a strategy for acquisition. What you do with the property after, you can do a whole bunch of different things. You could turn it into a rental. You could turn it into a flip. There's a lot of different things you can do with it. We're going to talk about some of those different strategies in a few minutes. It's a great strategy, though, for people that don't have a lot of cash. And I've had one of my biggest fans is, and some of you know him, if you were sent here by Brian Casella, he's one of my students, and he's become kind of famous online since I trained him on this. But he became famous not for real estate investing per se, but he does a lot of trainings now. He's actually he's responsible for the fact that I'm back in the teaching game in some ways, because he actually picked up a property, I believe, for $7,200, and I think it was worth around 90 or 100,000 bucks. And after he got this, he went online and said, "Man, I'm at this auction. I just picked up this smoking deal, and I want to thank my mentor, Mike Wolf, for helping me do it." And I was, at this point, my daughter was pregnant, and I decided that I wasn't going to do teaching for a little while, because I wanted to be available for her, my grandkids, and all that good stuff. And he posted that. I had all these strangers calling me up saying, "When's your next training? When's your next training?" And anyway, to make a long story short, because he kind of sold out the training for me, I did one more training. And then I realized that I really miss teaching. And that's why I'm here today. So it's kind of Brian's fault. But anyway, he got a really smoking deal on a property. So once again, $7,200, that was a single family home. You don't need a ton of cash to get started in this strategy, but the more money that you have, the more opportunity that you're going to have. And so it makes sense if, one of the things that I love to teach when I do the 4-day training is how do you raise money? I'll give you one of the ways that you can do it. So imagine you came to the training and you now knew how to do tax deeds inside and out. And I know some of you are going to say, "Well, I don't have a track record. Why is somebody going to invest in me?" Because I've seen that question come up a few times with different speakers. Well, imagine you went to them and you said, "Well, here's some examples of some deals that my team has done." Now, because I'm giving you my team, so my team is now your team. So you're never gonna say to somebody, you're not gonna lie to them and say, "Listen, here's some deals that I have done." You're gonna say, "Here's some deals that my team has done, and we have the ability to get more deals like this, but we just need more capital so we can take down more deals. If you're willing to put up some cash, and we're not even asking for a large amount of cash, if you're willing to put up a small amount of cash, I'm willing to do all the work, and then you and I can split the profit together." So as you can see, if you do 1 or 2 deals with other people's money, eventually you'll have enough money on your own that you won't need to use other people's money anymore, although I recommend you still do. If somebody helped you by funding your deals, keep bringing them in on some more deals, and always just give appreciation and gratitude for those people who helped you get where you're at. So you can keep doing deals with their money and partnering up with them, and then having some of your own money and doing more deals. And this is how you can really build get into the game relatively quickly. Now, I just want to kind of clarify, none of this is get rich quick. You may go to the auction several times and come home empty-handed, not with no properties, because sometimes it will be competitive. However, if I had to pick a time in history ever to get started, it would be right now, as the auctions start to reopen and they have all this backlog of inventory. And as the foreclosure moratorium eventually comes to an end, we are going to see a lot of supply. And obviously, a lot of people who lost their job are not going to be able to participate in these auctions. And so I believe, and I'm hoping there's going to be less competition than ever, but also more opportunity than ever. So that, I believe, is what's coming down the pipeline. And that's why I didn't want to skip it, even though you can't, at least in my favorite county, you can't go do it right now, but you're going to be able to do this relatively soon. So which is better, liens or deeds? Liens are less work. They're really easy for somebody who wants to absolutely be an armchair investor, as long as you know that once in a while you may lose money doing it. Because if you get a property and you find out after the fact that the person's not going to redeem, you're not going to get any money on your certificate, and then you get to the point where you have to foreclose and you realize, I don't want this property. If you start doing your due diligence at that point and realize you don't want that property for whatever reason, you're going to walk away from what you initially invested. You're not going to get anything back. So if you do enough of them and make enough money that you don't mind taking a loss every now and then, you can do it. But I think for a little bit more work, I'm always happy to get a house and a much bigger paycheck, and also the potential to get that cash flow if you're renting it, or appreciation, or if you're holding on to the property long enough to get some tax benefits from owning it. You can also quickly flip the property. You can sell it as is. There's a lot of different things you can do with these properties that you can't really do with a tax lien. So liens and deeds, by the way, are more common and profitable during chaotic times in history. And I can't think of a more chaotic time in history than right now. So I truly believe we're going to see a lot of these in the very, very near future. And it really makes sense to get prepared. As many of you know, I'm friends with Brendan Burchard. If you don't know who he is, look him up, but he's a buddy of mine, and I volunteer at all his live events. And one of my favorite sayings that he says is, the time to get the map is before you go into the woods. So now's the time to get the map and learn how to do some of this stuff, so that when these auctions open up, you are ready to pounce on them. If you wait too late, then they're probably going to start off slow. I remember I used to do a lot of investing in Las Vegas back during the last recession. And I wasn't doing tax deeds. I didn't know how to do them back then, but I was doing foreclosure auctions, what are known as trustee auctions, which means that the banks were auctioning off properties. And I remember I went to, there was a parking lot near downtown Las Vegas where they would hold the auctions literally every day, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, there was an auction. There were that many foreclosures in Vegas at that time. And when I first started going there, and actually Cal, I'm not sure if Cal's on here right now, but he actually came on one of my tours where I actually took him to that auction. But anyway, when we first started to go to that auction, my team and I, there was us and maybe 5 or 6 other people there. And we would all talk amongst ourselves and say, listen, if you let me have this property, I won't compete against you on that property. And we just decide who's going to take what. And it was really, really cool. But then that 5 or 6 people turned into 10 people, and then it turned into 20 people. And then it was not a secret anymore. People from all over the world were starting to go there, and this parking lot was filled up. And anyway, the opportunities, the best time to get on opportunities before everybody else. When everybody starts to hear about it and they start training on things, you want to be ready to roll. So in any case, these things there's going to be a lot of properties going for auction, most likely, not just tax deeds, but also the foreclosure auctions. Also keep in mind that more people became millionaires during the Great Depression than any other time in history, except for actually 2007, 2008, more people became millionaires then. And right now, there's going to be this massive transfer of wealth. And every single one of you has the potential to be on the good side of that transfer, not on the bad side of that transfer, and receiving money by once again getting out there and solving problems. So a lot of people ask me, Mike, if this is such a great strategy, why haven't I heard of it? Well, most people don't want you to know about it. Most people who are going to these auctions, for example, they certainly don't want to create competition for themselves. I don't actually compete against my students, by the way. I don't do the tax deeds anymore because, like I said, I'm in the market to buy 20, 30, 40 homes at a time. Buying 1 and 2 doesn't make sense to me anymore at this point in my career. So most people who know how to do it aren't really going to be too keen to teach you. The banks aren't going to say, hey, don't buy our mutual funds. You should go to the auctions. You'll get a way better return. They're never going to tell you that. All the people that actually, and companies that actually know how to do this stuff properly or even semi-properly, they have absolutely no incentive to show you this. A lot of people, they see that and they think, well, the only option is I buy it and then I fix it and then I flip it. Well, that's definitely one of the options, but I want to just I kind of want to get those creative juices in your brain flowing a little bit and just show you some different things that most people often don't think about. And buying and selling it as is. You can buy, fix, and flip. That's the obvious one. You can buy a rent and hold. And like we said, $900 a month, you get that $15K back pretty quick. That's typically when people work with me, I like to give them other resources besides just the strategy, because I realize that some of the best strategies don't necessarily take place in your own backyard.